Welcome to Replayable, where we go into depth on our favorite tabletop games that keep us coming back again and again. I'm the start player Todd, and today I'm joined by Greg and Paul. For our 44th episode, we'll be drawing with elvish crayons in Iron Dragon. This game was originally published in 1994 by Mayfair Games, with a second edition released in 2001 and a third edition in 2017. It is designed by Darwin Bromley and Tom Wham, with artwork by Larry Elmore, Javier Gonzalez-Cava, and Aaron Riley. Hey, do either of you know how I can deliver jewelry to the plateau of Gorgoroth?
Well, do you want to dig through mountains or cut down trees?
Right?
Yeah, just don't go through the underworld. It'll cost you a little bit extra.
Exactly. And just as an aside, apparently that's where Mount Doom is, on the plateau of Gorgoroth. That was a Lord of the Rings joke. It failed.
I thought so.
Yeah. In Iron Dragon, players build railroads in a fantasy world filled with elves, orcs, trolls, and dragons. Using crayons, players draw train routes on the board, connecting cities and transporting goods to earn money. The game features special mechanics like foremen who can lower costs based on their abilities, and ships to transit the oceans. The game ends at the end of the round, in which at least one player has connections to 7 of the 8 major cities and has accumulated $250 or more.
Gold pieces.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Let's start out by talking about the different types of train games, because so far we've talked about 18XX and we've talked about Age of Steam, and
Yes.
I feel like Crayon Rail is another one of these pillars of train games.
Yeah, and then there's the cube rails, right? I think those are the big 4 in my mind.
Oh, okay. So we're just going to say Ticket to Ride doesn't count?
I mean, it's a rummy game.
Yeah, it's a network building. I feel like Ticket to Ride is inspired by some of the others that came before it, including Crayon Rail.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's talk about it.
Absolutely. I feel like at least once a year I see an argument about whether or not it's a train game, though.
Oh, I know. I was totally trolling you guys with that one. And trolling because it's keeping in theme, right? With yeah.
But yeah, I have played a lot of Crayon Rail games. Not as much as Greg, but I remember back in the 1900s, we would pull out either Rail Baron or Empire Builder to play for a Sunday afternoon, at least until we discovered Iron Dragon, and then that kind of just made us chuck everything else out the window. But yeah, I've always had fond memories of the Crayon Rail games.
Mm-hmm. I had to laugh for a moment there when you said back in the 1900s. So I'm like, what, do you mean like the turn of the century? And you know.
It's what my kids
How old are you, man?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody, Paul's a vampire.
I went there too, Todd.
Specifically the 1990s, but they're all
There we go.
they're all the 1900s.
So, Greg, what do you think about Crayon Rail games? Are they a pillar in train games? And if so, why?
I think so. I think they're a lesser pillar. They don't have I don't think they have as big a following. That's probably the best way to put it.
Okay.
Or as many releases, right?
Or as many games, but that goes kind of hand in hand. But I think they have been influential to train games of the current century. But definitely not as big of an influence as some of the others, I don't think.
And how do you think Crayon Rails stack amongst those other ones we discussed? So 18XX, Age of Steam, and Cube Rails. Sorry, Ticket to Ride.
I would say they simulate something that the others don't, which is the logistics of running a train. You build track in the others, and there's some timing of trying to get to stuff before other people and in some of the others. But with the Crayon Rail, it's all about that pickup and delivery. It's about building the track when you need it. It's about getting to the stuff that you have contracts for, moving it around, trying to do it efficiently.
Yeah, the other ones don't have an actual train that you're moving around on the map.
Right.
Okay, that's interesting.
That's something Crayon Rail does that the other train games don't.
I see.
You're physically moving a piece that represents your train.
For a minute, I thought you meant other train rail games. I'm like, wait a minute, what? Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I mean, those logistics just they're absent. They're all abstracted out of the other games, and so that's something that is really unique and fun about the Crayon Rail is you get to play from a different perspective, and you still have to manage an economy, and you still have to try to do good network planning, but those logistics of what you're going to pick up when and how you're going to get it there quickly is absent from the other games.
Yeah.
With some exceptions like Bus and Ticket to Ride Markland, they add some of those logistics
Sure.
It is a central point of Crayon Rail.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're talking about the broad strokes. Obviously,
we are.
You can get into all the little exceptions.
So, my exposure to Crayon Rail is actually fairly limited, and we're going to talk about that when we start making the comparisons and the like. What sets Iron Dragon apart from other Crayon Rail games for you?
I haven't actually played a lot of different Crayon Rails games. I've played Empire Builder, I've played Iron Rails, I've played Euro Rails in a computer game implementation. And that's actually what I've played most. Not the Euro Rails map itself, but that implementation had the ability to do randomized maps. And that's actually what I've played the most is just random maps against bots. I've played that game. It was my go-to time killer for a long time.
Greg, I want to step in there because when you say random maps, I think that's a really great addition that whoever programmed that thing did. Because one of the issues I found with a lot of the Empire Builder games is that they were designed for a verisimilitude of geographic locations as well as resource production. And so after you play a title several times, you realize that there are going to be very narrow routes that everyone wants to fight over because of the destinations and the places the resources come from being geographically similar to real life. It forces the game to basically have favorite places and favorite routes.
Right.
And I think one of the things that's special about Iron Dragon is they didn't have to make it like anything in real life. And so they were able to design it with a high variability where every time you play, depending on the demand cards you draw, you might be going far east, you might be going far west, traversing the north, traversing the south.
Yep.
It can really change from game to game.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly where I was going with that, is that comparing at least Empire Builder, Euro Rails, and Iron Dragon, what I've found is that Euro Rails and my limited experience with Empire Builder, it felt like, there were established, these are kind of the best routes. If you get those, as long as you've got the deliveries that match, you're going to be on track for a good game. I think there's a little bit of that in Iron Dragon, but it feels like there's definitely different angles that you can take there's not a single best path through any location.
Right.
There are good paths, and there are some paths that are more expensive, but even that is mitigated by the foremen in the game.
Right.
What might have been like an expensive path that wasn't worth doing in another title, in Iron Dragon, well, you've got a dwarf, you can get through those mountains cheap.
Right. Or an elf, because it seemed like trees went everywhere you needed to go, and you just kept the same foreman throughout the entire game the last time we played.
Yeah, well, I was having a blessed game. Everything just fell together very well for me in our last game.
Yeah, I do want to add that aside from the theme, what really hooked me the first couple times I played Iron Dragon was both the foremen and the ships, because those are not in any of the other Crayon Rail games.
Right. Let's talk about those briefly. So the foremen allow you to get a power that you can use for as long as you have that foreman. So let's say that you're building into a mountain hex, you can do it for just 1 gold instead of 2 gold to get into the hex. And it's not even a hex, it's just the icon on the board, although...
Well, it's a hex intersection.
Right. They didn't draw the lines around them, so you see all the vertices.
Vertices is a much better word, but you're tracing the hexagon vertices to draw your track. Yes.
Right. Whereas if you have an elf, you can get into a tree space for 1, but otherwise it costs 2 and so on. And then the ships allow you to go from 1 port and then take C squares, depending on the speed of the ship that you hire, which is a random card draw. And then you're on this ocean until you arrive at another port.
The sea is still hexes.
Yes.
Not squares.
Absolutely.
Did I say squares?
And that's
I'm
one of
just
the
gonna
you said C squares. Yeah, that
keep
was
messing
funny.
it up. Yeah.
One of the things that really hooked me early on was I realized, ships allow you to make big deliveries with almost zero track.
Yeah.
And I think that really balances out the beginning of the game.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean for those of us who don't have cards that synergize well together?
Right. You might have a big delivery that you would never be able to do in a normal game because you just don't have the funds yet. But you get on a boat and you sail there. It just takes some extra time in Iron Dragon.
Right. Okay. One of the things that I was interested in, and we just played this last night, and I hadn't played it at least in a while before then, was watching the economy rise and fall. There are times where I was building a track out at the end of my network in anticipation of making a big delivery. I didn't have the money to complete it, but I had sorted deliveries along the way that I could deliver and then get there. It struck me as possible, if I wasn't careful, that I could run out of money.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's one of those key factors to the logistics of the game is planning out where you need to go. Do you have the money to get there? And then seeing if you can upgrade your train along the way and timing the upgrade of the train so that you don't end up with not enough track and too much train.
Right.
But, that's the core of the game there is finding those paths and making sure that you can afford to get where you need to go. And like Paul said, this game offers that extra little shortcut that if you can get to a port, maybe you can get where you need to go, even if you don't have the money to build the track.
Right.
Yeah, because there are those random events. And if they wipe out a bridge with a flood, thereby costing you an extra $3 that you didn't plan on, that can be a really horrible experience because by the rules as written, there's nothing you can do other than just cycling through cards until you draw one that you can complete.
Or two of your bridges when you're in last place.
There are variants. There's a lot of variants written in the rule book, such as a mercy rule, which says a player can take a loan of $20, but they have to pay back 40 as soon as they have it. Things like that.
Oh.
Yeah, the computer game that I played has the built-in default rule of you just take whatever amount you need to spend, you take double that in debt. So similar, but not fixed at 20.
Okay. Interesting. So, Greg, you mentioned having too much train, not enough track.
Yeah.
Do you have a preferred upgrade path for your engine?
I will always upgrade speed first unless I actually have 3 deliveries to make. That's my preference. I think upgrading to the extra storage on your train is often more speculative. It allows you to carry extra cargo that maybe you don't have delivery for.
Right.
But it's typically valuable cargo. So, for example, picking up spells down in the southeast of the map and carrying those across to the mainland, even if you only have 1 delivery for them, pick up 2, sure,
Right.
But because it's speculative, because you maybe don't have that delivery, I don't put a high priority on getting that 3rd storage.
I'm the opposite. I like to gamble.
Yeah?
I do.
I do like having the extra space just for items of opportunity.
I also like to chuck my cards. So I think that's why I like upgrading to the heavy first, because I have no qualms about just discarding all 3 of my cards to draw 3 new ones.
Wow.
Yeah, that loss of tempo, like you said, it's a gambler's game at that point. But I always balk at that. But maybe that's something I should explore more, especially if you have high valued cargo and you're in an area that it will deliver well for. Maybe it's worth it rather than running across the map.
Right. So, Paul, last night you said that the card you were looking for was still 30 cards down in the deck. Which singular card were you searching?
Oh, yeah, that was Rainbow Bridge.
Oh, that one?
Greg was so far ahead that I had to take shortcuts. And so one of the shortcuts I took was just connecting the 2 old world major cities to each other, but not connecting to them, and hoping Rainbow Bridge would come up to give me 7 cities. As it was, I ended the game with only 4. So my score was technically 0.
You don't even get to have a score if you haven't made the connection to 7.
Exactly.
Got it. So, do we want to talk about the fact that there is, what do they call it, underground?
Underground, yeah.
So there's a second level map to this map.
It's 3D.
Yeah. Right.
And it's kind of a shortcut, especially because it goes under the ocean or the sea. But you have to pay bribes to move down there and to build down there.
Unless, I think there's a troll foreman you can have that allows you.
There's also an orc. Yeah, the trolls and the orcs, don't worry about the bribes.
And in fact, allow you to collect bribes from the other players if they are having to pay them.
That's right. Which I've heard can be quite lucrative in high player count games. The orc.
Ooh. Okay, that's interesting. In our little 3-player game last night, only 2 of us ended up building any track down there, and there was no real competition for spaces.
Yeah, and there was very few times you guys ran your train down there as well. Yeah.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of cards that I saw that needed beer, and I saw none of them that had delivery endpoints to either of the cities down there.
Yeah. I mean, the only reason I went down there at all was just as a shortcut to get to one of the western cities. In this game, I was lucky enough to have most of my contracts running up and down the coast in the middle of the map.
The synergy of your cards was amazing, Greg.
Yeah. It was, I mean...
I think what Greg's track did, building from Bluefield to Ryla to Wickety, has the highest probability of drawing cards that pay out for. But it's really all in the cards. You know, we only saw about half the deck last night.
Right.
Not
if we
even,
had drawn the other half of the deck, we definitely would have built very different track.
Right. No one really built to the southern portion of the map. There was really no need for ivory or to get down to there. I mean, there were a couple of ivory cards, but none of us prioritized that commodity. And...
Or the spices, yeah.
Right.
Right. And I know the time we played before this with Al, I was definitely down in the south and also in the underworld, picking up beer, picking up spices. And those are really lucrative contracts. Those are, some of the more cost effective, if once you're delivering them, but they're also costly to get into because, getting through those jungles is really pricey if you don't have the right foreman.
Yeah, I have heard discussions about hops only being sourced out of Bluefield and spells only being sourced out of Ozark as being possibly overpowered because their delivery amount is higher if you look at the distance needed to travel than any other commodity.
Because they're only from... I think
their delivery reward is given a small premium since they're a single source.
Exactly, yeah. I think distance traveled and then availability on the map are the two things that I think affect price.
What about dragons? Aren't dragons sole sourced?
Yeah.
They are. I think there's just a lot less cards and there's almost no deliveries to the dragon source, Nordcastle.
Right.
And they're not a major city.
Right.
The other two are from major cities.
Correct. There's a lot of cards that go to them, and then once you're there, you have some lucrative contracts to go from. So I think just knowing that and making sure Bluefield and Ozark are in your network, although Ozark has to be in your network, is just good strategy.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't have to be. You would be remiss in not pursuing a connection there.
Well, I say that because Ozark is permanently connected to Wickety. So the only way to get to 7 is to get the pair.
Yeah, you have to get one of them. You might as well get both of them.
So is there a city that you traditionally avoid out of the 8 that are possible?
I usually avoid either the underground city,
Udaran,
or the far west city, Eaglehawk. I mean, I had one game, I think I actually won, where I avoided Ryla, which is in the dead middle of the map.
Well, how did you manage that?
Right? So it varies, but I would say on the whole, it's either going to be the underground or the far west city.
See, I thought you were going to say something like Kola up there in the northwest.
Yeah, for me, it's Eaglehawk and Kola are the two that I'm like, I'm probably not going to go to one of those. Then maybe, what is the one in the northeast?
Bluefeld?
No, to the east of that. On Octomare
or whatever.
That one I could see maybe if you had if you're already out on the western side of the map, if you're already heavily built out there, just ignore Octomare and go down to Wickety.
Right. Welcome to Todd, Greg, and Paul just murder these city names.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to just at least be...
Right?
I'm trying to copy whatever...
I mean, I don't think anybody's going to correct our pronunciation.
Well, I mean, they're fantasy names. I think the only person that could is the designer of the game.
Yeah. So
Well,
I guess Tom, tell us if we butchered it.
right. Tom could let us know. All right. So I think we've done a decent job of describing some of the uniqueness, some of the theme about this game. Does all of that combined create some memorable moments for you guys? And of course, we've already talked about Greg's amazing synergy on his cards just lining up. In fact, Greg, the one last night that was just the pièce de resistance was when you picked up like a 46 gold delivery point on your route coming out of the north of the Eastern Isle, and you had to build like 2 rail segments to get to whatever that town was. Let's see here.
Yeah,
I feel like
on the island there.
right.
I should be looking at a map.
Or Pineware. I don't know.
Yeah,
It has
he
a Y
needed to
in
get
it.
to like Penjold.
Glenduin or something. Or Penduin.
I think it was
Penguin?
Penjold.
Oh, okay. Penguin. I don't know. I'm not looking at the name at all. And I have trouble reading that
Benedict
font.
Cumberbatch can't say that word. Yeah. Yeah, you were coming of Octomare, and you had that island hopping route to the north that took you over to Bluefeld, and then you just managed to pick up a delivery to Penjold that you hadn't created a link to, but it was like 2 legs away.
And, that was late game, and that was definitely one where I got lucky. I had potions on me that I didn't have a card for. And when I made my delivery over in Octomare,
Either one.
Yeah, next card I drew, potions to that island, and hey, couldn't have been happier. But, I had taken the risk of building across to Octomare because I had some safe deliveries that were smaller deliveries down in the south that I could have done. Mm-hmm. But it just didn't seem like there was going to, it was like a lot of small deliveries, and building across to Octomare first, picking up the wand there to deliver down to one of the J cities, I forget which, was more costly, but I think, but it was a little more time efficient.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, everything just seemed to, there was a lot of serendipity for me in that game where every time I made a decision, it turned out to be the right one.
Gotta love it when that happens.
Yeah.
How about you, Paul? What memorable events have you had?
The first many, many times I played the game, my favorite part of it was just using my imagination and, thinking things like, oh, pilgrims to the underground, why are they going there? or getting spells and delivering up to Nordcastle and being like, oh, some dragons got out of control. They need some spells back. But more recently, I've just been having fun leaning into the luck of the game, especially when it's close. And in the last couple rounds where you see your opponent is about to hit 250 gold, sometimes I'll just, pitch 3 cards and draw 3 new ones. And I remember one time where I was able to draw a flood, knock out 2 of their bridges, and all of a sudden they weren't able to end the game until they did 1 more delivery.
Right.
I love being able to manipulate some of the luck of the game that way.
That's really cool. And so the events in that case allowed you to do that. I don't recall events being in the other game. Well, I know they weren't in the other game that I played that was Crayon Rails like. In fact, I want to say the other one that I played was a precursor to Crayon Rails, or at least a joint cursor, if that's possible. So it was a game called Damfrost.
Okay.
And it ended up winning the Spiel des Jahres in 1984, but it was originally created in 79. And in that one, you had hexes, but you drew your rails from the center of the hex into the next hex. And, once you got done paying for that network, you then were rolling your dice and moving your train around. So that part was very similar, but you didn't have the same kind of restrictions. So you could build parallel to other people's track. You could take other people's track, and you didn't have the variety of goods the way you do in Iron Dragon in that game. But there were no events.
Yeah, Empire is very much like Iron Dragon. They do have events.
Yeah.
Things like floods are in every game, as far as I'm aware.
Okay, interesting. So with that, let's move on to the prompts. The first one is weight and complexity. On Board Game Geek scale of 1 to 5, how would you rate the complexity of Iron Dragon? Greg, I'm going to give you the honors.
I'm going to go controversial here. I think Iron Dragon, I'll give it a 3. Crayon Rail games are not that complex. I mean, you're drawing lines on a map and picking up stuff from one place and taking it to another. Most of the complexity comes from dealing with the costs of various terrain and dealing with track that other people lay and stuff like that, and just trying to figure out your logistics. Iron Rails, though, because it has that underground area, because it has the ships, because it has the foremen, it just adds these other layers into it that do ramp up the complexity a little bit, but it's still not a super complex game. It's a 3 for me.
Okay.
Why is that controversial?
Yeah, why is that controversial?
I don't know, because I was going to say 2, and then I realized that, well, no, I'll give it a 3, because... and I felt like 2 was going to be controversial.
So I don't think 3 is controversial at all. That's what I had as well. Once you understand where the resources are and, where they end up needing to go, and you can kind of parse the information on how to do that. I remember the first time I played this game, I got hung up on the fact that only one of the towns on each card would be a delivery for me, because you have to turn the card in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then I couldn't make 2 deliveries on the same card. But once you understand all that, yeah, I think this game gets fairly understandable, and we'll talk about some of the other things that come into it. But I like 3 on this one. What did you have it down as, Paul?
A 2.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, so I guess
Well,
it wasn't...
certainly more complex than Empire Builder games. I don't think it's 20% more complex, so I think it's still within the 2.
Okay.
So you agree that, generally speaking, crayon rail games are in about a 2.
For me, they are.
Yeah.
Okay. Then what about strategy on the same scale, 1 to 5? Paul?
I give it a 3. There's a lot of path dependency here, and the early track you draw has a huge effect on your late game decisions.
Ugh, does it ever? Okay.
Yeah, same for me. I feel like this has a little less reaction to what other players do, in the sense that, oh, well, he's built that rail, so I need to go get this other area of the map and make sure that I have access to some of those more expensive resources that maybe some of the other maps have. But you still have to plan ahead a lot and make sure that you've got a sustainable rail.
Right. So let me ask a question in a slightly different way. What would it take to make this a 4 in your book?
Make it a stock game.
Okay.
I think layering on a little more resource scarcity might do it. Or maybe making it so you had to purchase the resources.
All right. Paul, what about you? What would it take for this to be a 4, you think? And again, in strategy.
What I have read is that some people do variants.
Okay.
To the amount of strategy in the game, one of which is having all of the demand cards be public.
Oh, that was one of the ones I was going to suggest. Yes.
Yeah.
Giving players the ability to lock one down by placing like a player marker on it.
Yeah, shared contracts.
Yeah.
Right. And so you could say, okay, this contract must be fulfilled by beer. And then you'd still have a race, possibly, but it allows you, 1, to vie for the same contracts, and 2, not to get beat by one of the super easy ones amongst the 3 on a single card.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I like it. So I had the game down as a 4 on strategy. And so when you guys both thought of it as a 3, I started trying to reevaluate. I'm like, okay, what am I thinking about it differently? What would it take to get it up there? And I like the idea of having the delivery cards be public and publicly fought over.
Yeah.
Or else alternatively starting out with a draft of them so that we could compete for that initial synergy instead of lucking into that initial synergy.
Yeah, I mean, I think also the strategy ramps up a little bit at higher player counts because the resource scarcity comes into play a lot more.
True.
Right?
Right. In a 3-player game, if I pick up 2 wands, it's probably not going to affect either of you. By the time I deliver 1, you'll be able to get what you want. But in a 4-player game or 5-player game, yeah, I pick up 2 wands and I might have just thrown somebody's whole next 10 turns out of whack.
Yeah, absolutely. That happened to us last night. In fact, we ran out of wands.
Oh, yeah. You wanted a wand, and Greg and I were holding them all.
Yes.
But that's a lot less likely. I mean, you could do it strategically in higher player counts where it's like, I know wands are valuable. Now I want to go to that 3rd cargo space because I want to pick up some valuable cargo just to keep it away from other people.
Right.
Well, there is also a variant in the rulebook that's called caching, and it's a way to increase the complexity and competitiveness. And what it does is if you drop off a good, like you don't deliver it, that good stays in the city you dropped it off at.
Ooh. Yeah, no, that happened at least once where I dropped off a surplus barrel in like Ryla because I just had it along for the ride just in case I drew a card that needed it. And when I didn't, I offloaded it and picked up some gems. So there would have been a barrel of beer in Ryla waiting for the first person to come in and take it.
Right? It would have been awesome.
Well, and I could see that. I mean, the other thing that I would say might be interesting is actually put values to what these resources are. Yes, the contract has a fixed payoff, but there's also, put a cost on actually picking it up. So when you drop it off in Ryla, maybe you only get half what you paid for it, but then somebody else has to pay that much or the normal price to pick it up or something. I don't know. That would make it more complex and it'd be hard to track. It's already a long game to begin with. So I don't know that a lot of these variations, I think the key to any good variation is that it shouldn't make the game significantly longer. So I think just scarcity is probably, putting it out there in the middle of nowhere or something might be interesting.
Yeah, the dragons have all the spells. Now you have to go fight a dragon to get them. Yeah.
I love it.
All right, so then luck. How much do you think luck plays a factor? Same scale, 1 to 5. And originally, I think I had this down as a 1, but after last night, I think I'm bumping it up to a 2. Overall, I didn't feel like there was a lot of luck, at least that couldn't be mitigated until Greg got great starting synergies. And Paul chucked his hand like 3 times in a row to find the one that he wanted to go with.
Yeah, I think the game has a fair amount of luck. I rated it a 3.
Same here.
To me, it's significant, not overwhelming. Although, when the Rainbow Bridge comes out really early, the luck probably ramps up to a 4 because you can get these 30 payout deliveries that only require 1 movement.
Oh, my goodness.
It's crazy.
And the Rainbow Bridge, just to be clear, it connects I can't remember.
Bluefeld and Octomare,
with just 1 movement, just like Wickedy and Ozuzark.
Wow. Because this is such a great thing to do on an audio medium, I'm going to share my screen for you guys.
I love it.
That's great.
So this is a picture on Board Game Geek of someone who has 3D printed a rainbow bridge, literally, so that when that card gets drawn, you can put this bridge on the map.
Nice. Now but they put it between Wickedy and Ozuzark in that picture, which is already there at the start of the game.
True.
Brilliant.
So then theme. How much do you think the theme has been integrated with this game? Paul?
Integrated is not the right word, but I rate this a 4 because compared to other Empire builders, the theme of this game is what keeps pulling me back in. I just love it.
I agree. I also had it down as a 4, and I kind of thought, how do I even describe fantasy railroads? Like, it's a niche within a niche in a corner. I don't know. It's a 4. It does that one weird thing really well. What did you have, Greg?
I'm beginning to think I'm theme blind, just because I always rate lower than everybody else. I rated it a 3. It does have some interesting theme. I don't feel that draw to it like Paul does, but I appreciate that, this is a fantasy theme. I like the fact that they have, if you go in the underworld, you have to pay extra because it's dangerous down there, whether that's you're paying guards or whatever, or tolls, and that the orcs don't produce anything. They just consume.
Oh my gosh,
I like some of those things, but
Todd pointed that out with much alarm last night. He's like, wait a minute.
Why did I build over here?
Anything.
I had a big delivery to drop off at an orc city, and then I was realizing I'm not going to pick anything up on my way out. That stinks.
But, when I'm playing this game, I don't really feel the theme. It becomes all numbers and routes and timing, So, maybe that's on me. Like I said, maybe I'm just theme blind.
Well, to approach it from a different perspective, Paul recently was given a copy of one of the previous 2 editions, whether it's the first or the second. They're pretty much the same.
Oh, yeah.
And we compared them, and I thought the theme has definitely been bumped up in the 3rd edition.
Absolutely. And
so you
much
agree.
better.
Great.
I do.
Yeah, no, if we'd been playing the 2nd edition, I probably would have knocked it down to a 2.
Right.
Because they did a nice job of the artwork elevates the theme and helps make it feel like you're on an old world map and all that. So I agree that's a nice addition to the game.
Right. So what's your favorite player count? What is the game best played at? Greg?
I put 4. I don't actually have a lot of experience playing at a variety of player counts, so it's hard for me to really answer this question. But I do feel like at 3 players, there just wasn't quite the competition for routes and for goods that I would have liked to have had in the game. I think one of the things that can be really fun about the game is being forced to use other players' routes just to get that one last step to a town that 2 other people or 3 other people have already built into. You can't build into it because it's at max capacity. So now you have to pay somebody $4 to get in, and those kind of things I think elevate the game to, the complexity a little bit and just make it a little more challenging to figure out what you're going to do each turn.
Mm-hmm. And resource scarcity also becomes more of a consideration?
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't played it at 5 though, so I don't know how much that would affect it. I imagine I would also like it at 5, but for me, since I've only played it at 3 and 4, definitely preferred 4.
Yep, I agree with 4 for all the same reasons, including a lack of experience at 5 or 6. Paul, what about you?
The same, 4 players. I think 3-player is a very friendly game.
Mm-hmm.
So I prefer 4-player. 2-player, you have to use variants to make yourself look up at what your opponent's doing, because when you play with rules as written at 2-player, you're just heads down the whole time.
Yeah.
Right.
So one of the 2-player variants I like is you only allow a single player to connect to a small city.
Oh, okay. So you force that use the other player's rails.
Yeah, I think
to
you'd have
get
to.
in out of.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and Greg, I remember there was a time last night where you did that going up the right side of the map where you literally calculated the number of squares you needed to use my track to get into and out of a city. And then you built your... What was that cough about?
I just had a little bit... little hexagon caught in my throat.
Oh, what did I'll look at. Whatever. I'm going to just...
It's funny you keep saying squares. I'm laughing.
Yeah, well, and because there are no lines on it either, so you calculated the exact number of links. There you go.
That's great.
Mm-hmm. To get from Ozu's Ark up to wherever it was, Oishjord or something, and you were able to run up and back on my rails in one turn and only pay the 4 gold for the privilege.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the fun things about the game, I think, is I don't want to spend the money to make that connection, but for $4, I can go across your rail. And I mean, that was probably would have cost me $20 to build. I think it was 15 links I went across of yours to get to Octomar from down south. Octomare. It's one of those things that, like I said, in 4-player, you just get more opportunities like that. And I imagine in 5-player, even more so, you get forced to do that. But
right.
In 6-player, it's fun to do that kind of thing where it's like, oh, I don't have to go around. I don't have to build my own track. I can just spend $4. It's something that only really happens a lot in the late game. In an early game, you can't afford to do it. But yeah, late game, it's like gaining that time and saving that money. It's just great.
Mm-hmm. So what is your least favorite player count? And Paul, I'm now really interested to hear this. I thought 2 was going to be your favorite. So
I have not played it, but my imagination tells me 6 players would be a horrid affair. With track routes becoming prohibitively expensive because you're having to zigzag around other people, which would just extend the gameplay length. I imagine 6-player Iron Dragon would take at least 8 hours.
That was my concern, was game length.
Yeah, I think for me it's hard to decide between 2 and 6. 2 because it would just be boring. There's just not enough... Right. It would be 2 players solitaire. It would feel that way to me. I maybe you could prove me wrong sometime. Good luck convincing me to sit down at that table.
The 4th chair who decided to abstain from this podcast would have disagreed with you as well.
Oh, yeah.
If you play with variant rules, 2-player can be quite fun.
Fair enough. Rules as written, I can't imagine 2 would be particularly fun, but yeah, 6 would be a nightmare. So I'll go with 6 in the end.
Okay. What about the actual playing time? Because boxes can lie, and this box has, I believe, a playing time of 240 minutes, so 4 hours. And what's interesting is it's not a range. So do we think that 4 hours is a good approximation for the amount of time it takes to play Iron Dragon?
I think it's about an hour per player.
Okay.
However, I'll get into it later, but my wife and I play with a house rule that I think makes it take closer to 45 minutes per player.
Okay. That's not too bad. So the 2 of you are playing and wrapping it up in 90 minutes?
Yeah, today we played a game in 80 minutes.
You played today?
That's right.
Oh, okay, so she had time to play a game of Iron Dragon, but not time to be on the podcast.
Yes, that is correct. I really wish he had joined us. That would have been a lot of fun.
That would have been great.
Right.
All right, I'm going to skip over which edition is the best. I think we've kind of already covered that. I'd be really interested to see what they do for a 4th edition, if they ever make one. I don't see how, since Mayfair Games doesn't exist.
Darwin Toys.
Okay, there we go. And on the expansions front, Paul, you mentioned there's one that can be purchased from Tom Wham, right?
Well, he sells it at conventions, and it basically adds combat to the game.
Which,
I'm curious about that.
what does that even mean?
So my research was that Darwin, and by extension Mayfair, refused to allow combat in the game because they want it to be a family game. So Tom sells his expansion as the designer at conventions.
Got it. I would be really interested to know how that even works. Like, how do you resolve combat?
So my understanding is that the trains and the foremen are given strength values, and then you add a die roll, and you have to be within a certain proximity of each other.
Yeah, so when I went to use your track yesterday and you landed on top of me, you could have given me a little bit of the what for.
There we go.
Said, no, you can't use my track unless you pay the price.
Right?
I mean, reading about Tom's expansion, it kind of reminded me of High Frontier.
Oh, because that has a combat option as well. One of the modules, which I'm not looking for space combat in my High Frontier games. It's hard enough getting...
Space is hard enough as it is. Why start fighting?
It's a race. All right, so most recognizable comparison. What is the highest ranking game that reminds you the most of Iron Dragon? Greg, would you like to go first or last?
Sure, I'll take the low-hanging fruit here.
Let's do it.
Well, I'm going to go with BGG Hall of Fame recent inductee Power Grid.
There you go.
The original version of Power Grid was actually a crayon rail game, or crayon rail adjacent game, where you built your network out with crayon. And the lineage there is really clear. It's, you're building networks, you're trying to connect things together. It doesn't have the logistics that I like, but it's a fun network building game where you need to try to, it's a shared map where you're not really getting a lot of exclusivity, but everybody has to connect to a lot of the same things, and it's really about who can do it fastest and make the most money doing it.
Excellent. I really like that one. When I first played Power Grid, it struck me as one of the first Euro games that I had played when I was newer to this hobby, that I felt everybody needed their own calculator, right? To go along with it, to calculate what it was you should be bidding on.
Especially after the mid-game.
Yeah.
Right. For the upcoming generators. How about you, Paul?
I mean, I already throw out High Frontier. It's pick up, deliver in space.
Okay.
With politics and combat. Although I think, to stay on theme, I will call out a game called In the Hall of the Mountain King.
Oh, okay.
You build a tunnel of networks to recover treasure and repair statues in your abandoned kingdom. And everybody's basically a troll.
Right. I like it. So I'll go with the easy one. And in fact, I may have mentioned it before. Pretty sure I did. We were talking about the pillars of train games, and one of them was Age of Steam, but there's also Railways of the World. And the copy that I got of that game was actually Railroad Tycoon, same game. We're just riding on the success of the PC game. But it was my first exposure to a train game where you also had a persona. So similar to the foremen, in that game, you are given a personality card, and that has...
Baron.
Yeah, that has a little extra oomph and asymmetric ability early on that you're going to use for the entire game. You don't get rid of that card like you do the foreman in Iron Dragon. But
I think the Barons just give you points, right?
Yes. I mean, it's not a different ability, but I believe it's points based on certain criteria, like how many... Right.
Agreed.
So the idea that you had something that made it, made your turn slightly unique within the concept of a pick up and deliver train game made an impression on me for Railroad Tycoon, later Railways of the World. So how about the less recognizable comparison, which everything is less recognizable in this category?
Yeah.
For a while there, I was going to pick a game and it was like, oh yeah, my most recognizable comparison is rated number 2000.
Well, I mean, you're dealing with a game that itself isn't in the top 700 or whatever, so...
Right.
Well, for me, my less recognizable comparison is another fantasy game that's dear to me, and it's called Valdora.
Oh, yeah.
Basically, you play as little adventurers with a backpack,
Mm-hmm.
and you buy tools that enable you to collect gemstones so that you can fulfill contracts in a fantasy kingdom.
And isn't that the one where like the contracts are pages in these books that are on each of the cities?
There's 4 big cities, and they each have this wooden booklet with cards that you turn as though they were pages. It's a very cute
mechanism.
Yeah, the game as a whole,
nice.
in my opinion. Yeah, I've held on to it for quite a while.
How about you, Greg? What did you have as your less recognizable comparison for Iron Dragon?
Oh, I actually had a hard time finding something. I wanted to find a pick up and deliver game because I'm going to go off on a tangent here.
Let's do it.
I'm not a fan of what is called a pick up and deliver game in the modern era.
Like Merchants of Venus?
Oh, you know what? I don't think I've ever actually played Merchants of Venus, so I'm not sure how that works. But a lot of, for example, Steam, Age of Steam, to me, those aren't pick up and deliver. Those are just connect and deliver. You're never picking, so I wanted to find something that had that feel of you actually have to go pick something up, move across the map and deliver it. And I didn't find anything that is a good modern game of that, but I ran across something that was an old favorite of mine, which was Undermining, which is a game from 2011 by Matt Tolman, where you're just in these you have little mining vehicle that you dig down into the ground and you pick up resources. All the resources are laid out in a grid to begin with, so you know what you can get.
Oh, yeah.
And you have limited cargo space, so you have to plan ahead what you're going to pick up and bring it back to do upgrades and build up your economy.
A lot like a computer game.
What computer game is that? Or you're just saying how it plays?
Yeah, you stumped me on what computer game is that. But Dome Keeper, or there's some other ones too. But yeah, it's all coming back to me, Greg, because I remember you taught me this game.
Yeah, that was probably back in the early days of our game group. Yeah. Anyway, it was a fun little game. I currently don't have a copy, but now I'm thinking I might want to pick it up again because I remember enjoying that game, and it had a lot of that kind of feel of you need to plan ahead, but people can mess up your plans by either taking what you want or whatever. And you had to plan out whether you were going to increase, what abilities you were going to increase on your little mining cart.
Okay.
Greg, with your description, did you consider Roads and Boats?
I've never played
that genre.
What?
I've never played. I've wanted to for years. Paul, I've asked you to play, and you keep saying, we need to do that. And then you've played without me.
Oh, man.
Wow.
I'm not bitter.
Sick burn.
Yeah, right?
No, I've never played. I would love to play.
Okay.
It's certainly.
We'll have to do that.
I've heard that before.
Yeah.
Oh, there's too many games that we want to play.
I thought about Roads and Boats as a potential mention here because you draw your roads on it. In fact, when you get the game, it comes with this rolled up piece of plastic or acetate, or whichever way you want to go. Mm-hmm. And getting it to lay flat stinks. Absolutely stinks. So if you have a sheet of plexiglass, which of course all good gamers have, just a 5x3 sheet of plexiglass sitting around. But if you do have one, it makes it a lot easier to do that drawing. My less recognizable comparison is one that I kickstarted. It was this overproduced game called Imperial Spells and Steam. And it is in that highly popular genre of game that is fantasy train games. Yeah, like these are the two games in the entire genre. But in Imperial Spells and Steam, players are wizards. You're using mana to build the rails, and the amount of mana crystals that you have to spend depends on the terrain, but also the potency of the spell. And so it doesn't look the same as a crayon rail game, but it has those two elements of being fantasy themed and train themed. So there you go. If you're ever interested in playing this weird, overproduced game, we can do it. It's supposed to be possible to do it in about an hour and a half.
Interesting.
Yeah. So house rules. And here, let's start talking about variants. How would you improve this game? So, Paul, I feel like I'll give you the honors just because you've actually played this game the most and have an opinion here. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the way I've been playing this game for a few years now, the rules as written say that players operate and then they build. Well, the way I play in my house is we build first and then we operate. It's a very different feel to the game, so it can be a hard sell for fans of the series. However, I kind of feel like that's the way it would have been designed today if it was a new design. And that's because, in my opinion, building first and then operating greatly reduces playtime because you receive new demand cards at the very end of your turn. So somebody else can start taking their turn while you deliberate and think about the next stops you want to go to, the next routes you want to build. And so it allows for parallel or simultaneous gameplay to a certain extent. Versus if you operate first and then build, when you draw those new demand cards, every other player at the table has to wait while you think and deliberate.
And then decide where you want to build your next track.
Before you start drawing. Right.
Okay. I really like that. What about just saying you can build and move interchangeably throughout your turn up to the $20 that's max spend?
I haven't tried that. My goal is to have people drawing while other people are moving.
All right.
Yeah, that's actually how we played the game last night, right? So,
right.
Yes.
It definitely feels, I mean, honestly, I don't think it changes the feel of the game that much. And I totally get what you're saying about it. It gives you time after getting new cards to think about and plan what you want to do with your money rather than trying to do it on the fly immediately after drawing them or whatever. The only thing that I saw that it didn't feel as thematic doing it that way was the event. The events felt less impactful doing it that way because you draw the card and the event happens and you can immediately, it didn't feel like you ever ran into a situation where the events messed up your plans and you couldn't do anything about it. It always felt like, okay, well, that's something I now have to deal with next turn.
Yeah, so I think there's other people that play this way, and there's been discussion about how to handle events. Some people like to make them impediments, and when I say that, they basically prevent the drawing player from responding to them, and they make the event last until the end of that drawing player's next turn. So that would be a harsher way to play with them versus I think last night we just said, don't worry about it.
Yeah, you just rebuild whenever on your next build. It's fine, yeah.
All right. So I enjoyed playing it. What did we clock in at last night, Paul?
So the three of us played the game in 2 hours and 59 minutes.
Nice. Okay.
So under 3 hours. Nice.
Just by the hair on our chinny chin chins. Yes. Okay. So we talked about playing from a shared display, and Paul, you mentioned somebody could lock in the trade good that would be eligible for that card. I didn't think about that possibility.
Right.
Are there other variants that you think might be interesting to try?
I don't know what the other variants are on the published games. I know in the app that I have, it has some variants about assigning random cities an extra reward for first delivery or for first connection, things like that. But I think that's just for variability on a map rather than actually adding a whole lot of extra strategy.
Okay.
During the podcast, we already talked about reducing the number of different colored tracks that connect into a city. We talked about caching goods on cities if you drop them off without delivery. There is also resource shortages, basically removing one of every resource from the game before you start.
Okay, interesting.
And then there are rules in the 2017 version for playing with a time limit or reducing the amount of gold you have to get to after 7 cities if you want a shorter game.
Oh my, so what's the limit there? Or is it just variable depending on how long you want the game to last?
You start with extra gold and... Okay, so it doesn't change the actual win conditions, but you start with extra gold and you ignore the event called war tax, which makes people pay money based on how much they have.
Right.
And at the beginning of the game, you draft demand cards.
Okay.
And that's the variant called Fast Game. They also have something called a challenge game where you have to pay to move even on your own track.
Oh my.
And pay to load goods. So it really, I think that would just make the game take a lot longer.
That's comparable to what Greg was talking about, right?
Yeah.
And then the weirdest rule is to play with 2 trains simultaneously.
Ooh,
what?
So every player gets 2 colors of train, and they get to move them separately. So you can have 2 trains going along And that just, I mean, you're going to make money a lot faster, but it's going to fry your brain a lot faster too.
Interesting.
All right.
Do you have to upgrade those trains separately?
Ooh.
Yes. Yeah, one starts as a level 2, the other starts as a level 1, and you just go from there. I've never actually tried that. I tried to talk Alan into doing it with me once, and he's like, no, my head's going to hurt too much.
But I think it's interesting that there are so many variants for this particular game.
Yeah, I think it's such a simple game that people want to customize it to their personal preferences. Mm-hmm. And all those preferences have, over the 30 years this game's been around, flowed back to Mayfair so they could put them at the end of their rulebook.
Wow. Very cool.
Yeah, it was something that I actually, you mentioned drafting. That was actually something that I was thinking about bringing up during the luck, is that, it would be interesting to, I think, do like either a draft to start the game, or maybe even like, draw 5, pick 3 for your starting contracts. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is, maybe even have a ticket to ride style contract board where your next card isn't just, random. It's, you get to plan what, what contract you're going after.
Yes. I like it.
So like being able to see the next 3 cards on top of the deck?
Yeah, kind of like that, and then events, when they come out, just like they normally would, just instead of going into the 3 cards.
Well, I was thinking more along the lines of the public display, and those were all contracts. The one thing that gets me about the game is the supply and demand is fixed in the cards that you have.
Yeah.
Like other players can't, other than creating the scarcity that Greg mentioned, but outside of that, like nobody can deliver beer to Ozuzark if I have that card, or even if that delivery exists on a different card, no one can take my card away from me. So let's say that you had 2 times the number of players on a public display and they were all up for bid, so anybody could deliver any of them.
Yeah.
That might be interesting, because then I got to beer, so I might be going for beer to Ozuzark. Does anyone actually want to try to take it from me? Or else, I guess, Paul, the idea of locking it in preempts someone from saying, I'm going to take the cheap one off and knock that out so Todd can't get the 56 gold delivery.
Yeah, if they have precisely, that's why the group that championed that variant put in a locking rule.
Yeah. In the combat variant, do you get to steal goods from other people too?
Ooh.
Anyway, you know what? This is interesting about this game. I think more than a lot of the games we play is that it does have a lot of space to kind of imagine what other things you could do with it. I feel like there's a lot to be explored in the genre.
Absolutely.
I'm eager to see, what what the next iteration of Crayon Rails might become, because it's a great framework.
I agree.
Yeah. So about that, Darwin's wife has taken ownership of the copyright for Crayon Rails and started up a company to begin publishing them again.
Oh, really?
And that's, I believe the website that she is publishing the games under is titled Darwin's Toys. And so far they have Express and Empire Builder and several maps.
The logo even looks like the Mayfair logo.
Yeah, they have several maps that you can also purchase for the older games.
Interesting.
That is interesting.
So hopefully they'll be able to do Iron Dragon in the near future.
That would be fantastic. So now, if this game's being played at game night, and it was, what do you want to play afterwards? What's the best double feature game that best goes along with it? Now, last night I chose Sleep, but did you guys play a second game?
We played Patchwork, which was nice.
Yeah, nice and fast?
Yes.
But if you could have played any game afterwards, what would you have selected as your doubleheader game?
Well, Todd, if you had stayed, I think I would have been very happy to play Quacks.
Okay.
Oh, why would you want to do that to me?
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot you didn't like that game, Greg. Sorry.
No, I like it okay. I just, it doesn't like me.
I'm just thinking a game that's quick.
Yeah.
And has a lot of laughs.
Yeah.
I think would be a perfect follow-up.
Absolutely. Something quick is definitely, and I like the idea of something that is a lot less serious, because it can feel kind of head down and serious when you're playing a Crayon Rail game. But I put down Transamerica or Trans Europa.
Right.
Perfect.
Because it's a nice, quick game. It follows the theme. It's clear. You can see the inspiration that this clearly came out of the same kind of genre. You're trying to connect 7 cities as quickly as possible. So, yeah.
I like that. In fact, I think I like that better than my answer. I know Megan does. Right? I went with Roll and Write. So I went with Railroad Inc.
Oh, nice.
And pick any one of them. I would have gone with the Deep Blue edition, but any one of those would have been Just keeping it in theme.
Yeah, I like that.
And drawing the tracks on your board. So what feature of the game still stands out to you? What has aged the best? Which, the old version of this, and Greg, I know you actually prefer the old version, is if you like fill in the blank, then you'll like Iron Dragon. So what are your thoughts about what is the aspect of this game that has aged the best? Craig?
For me, it's just that logistics planning. There aren't many games that I feel give that same feel of like getting to plan out ahead and really taking your time with things, because so many games want you to accomplish something every turn. And this game, it's not about that. It's about planning ahead. And maybe you have a turn where all you're doing is moving, but that's okay because you've got your plan and it's going to make you money and going to put you on the path to the next big income.
Right.
And then also route planning and looking for those opportunities to use other players' tracks creatively and effectively, and or maybe draw a better route. Like last night I connected through that middle city, but then I had so many things going up and down the coast that I ended up just connecting a line, cut that out of the loop, and over the course of the game probably saved 3 turns using that shorter route.
Right.
I like those things.
Nice. Paul, what did you have for what feature of the game has aged the best?
Pretty simple. Drawing with crayons.
Drawing with crayons. Okay.
But for real, I love how simple that is.
Yeah.
That you're just drawing lines, but there's so much weight and like responsibility into the early lines you draw. They're just going to ripple affect the rest of your game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You choose a path and you're stuck with it because you don't want to pay to redo it. And there's a lot of times it's like, why did I go that route? Right? I wish I had gone this other way.
I love it.
I like it. So again, your answer is better than mine. So Paul, this time you win the better answer.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. For me, it was the foremen and the fact that you could rotate them, or rather I really like the fact that you can pay 1 to draw 1 randomly or take one off the top of the discard pile, or else pay 5 and go find the one you're looking for. I haven't had that kind of experience in a train game where I could choose the power I wanted in such a fashion. And each turn it was something to evaluate was, okay, do I want to stick with the elf and pay for the mountains, or do I want to try to draw, a dwarf or whatever the case may be? I really like that about this game. It gives it a unique flavor.
Yeah, that's a big reason why I like this more than the other Empire Builders.
Yeah. So what feature of the game now disappoints? So what may not have aged as well? And I went with the easy one on this, and that is that there's not a currently imprint version. Like, I want to own this game, but I have to content myself to playing your copy until this gets a 4th edition.
Yeah, I mean, it's going for like $100 on the secondhand market right now. It's
I am not buying it for $100.
Right.
But what did you have?
So I stayed in theme. For me, what's disappointing is mistakenly using wet or dry erase markers, or when you do, trying to use harsh cleaners to clean them off and thus permanently scarring your game board. It's just super easy to leave a scar on this game board if you don't use the right drawing utensils. So crayons are good, and what I've switched to, which are perfect, are grease markers or grease pencils.
Yeah, that works great.
Yeah. And with the little string that you pull back so you can unwind some of the wrap around it and expose more of the grease.
Yes, I've never, ever had a problem since switching to the grease pencils.
Interesting. All right. And Greg?
So what I think is probably the downfall of this game, or the what's likely to be something that bothers people about this game, is one of the things I mentioned, the fact that you have turns where all you're doing is just moving across the map. I don't mind it so much because I feel like everybody goes through that, and you definitely have rounds that go really quick because everybody's just moving their 12 or 14 steps on the track. And also the economy can feel kind of slow. I like it. It's not a snowball, but I see that it's a weakness of the game, that you're not building up any momentum in the game. And I think that means that you run into a lot of games like the one last night where there's a clear winner halfway through, and unless they get bad luck or somebody else gets really good luck, nothing's going to really change.
So I actually almost said that, and it's because this game and many like it have this huge transition point where the whole game you're ramping up by building or by acquiring, in the case of like Rail Baron, and then you hit this inflection point where you completely stop and switch modes to the boring, only operate, only move back and forth and try to collect money as fast as possible. And it's that switch of modes that I think can be offsetting.
Yeah, there's nothing to spend money on. I mean, you're just collecting money up to 250, and it's a race, which can, in a tight game, can be really intense, but, it can just come down to who got the better card draw, That's disappointing in a 3-hour game.
Yeah, and I think my point is this is not the only game like that. I feel like all pick up and deliver games fall victim to that transition of, oh, I'm done building, I'm done acquiring, I'm just going to run my engine.
Right. So has this game replaced a previous one for you? I'll say that I've already mentioned the one, so I don't have a lot of experience with these kinds of games. But Damfrost, I continued to own just because it won the Spiel des Jahres, and I collect those. But I would never opt to play that game over this one. How about you guys? Greg?
I don't really have anything for this. And it's not because, this is such a unique game, but it's just, I don't own the game for one, but beyond that, it's just, I can't think of anything that I would play this instead of. It's for, it's just, I would play this instead of Empire Builder, certainly, but that's probably, a trite answer.
Well, no, that's my answer. I unloaded all of my other Crayon Rail games after getting Iron Dragon.
Yeah.
Nice. Then it's not trite. It's a good answer. Well selected, both of you. So has this game since been replaced? And if so, by what?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. Well, you just played it again. You basically played it twice within 24 hours. So I agree. I believe that answer from you.
It's one of my wife's favorite games, yes.
Greg?
I don't think so. Yeah, I can't think of any other game that, like I said, gives me that same feel of logistics and planning and building out a fun network. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I can't think of anything that replaces it.
So I'm going to mention another copy of Paul's. So Paul's deluxe version of Age of Steam is pretty amazing. And it seems like partially because we keep it, where we play our games, it's easy to say, okay, let's break out Age of Steam. But I would say we play that more often than I think I think of playing Iron Dragon.
Oh, yes.
But I think a lot of that comes down to playtime. It's not like it fits the same, it doesn't hit the same buttons for me, at least.
True.
Yeah.
Okay. Soundtrack. What music would you want to listen to while playing? And sadly, I think I have an answer of what I don't want to listen to the next time, but I'll tell that one at the end, but go ahead. Great. What did you have?
So I actually have 3 things because this is a 3-hour game. And so, you got to have a long playlist. First was the Murder on the Orient Express soundtrack by Patrick Doyle. It's got a lot of good music in it. It's a little bit too thrillery at times, but it's got some great tracks on it, especially tracks 2 through 6 that give you that feeling like you're on a train that I like. He also has a couple other tracks on an album called Impressions of America. One, I'm going to give credit to a person on Spotify called Playlist Geek for helping me find those on one of his playlists.
Yep.
Another soundtrack that I thought would be a good fit is Snowpiercer soundtrack by Marco Beltrami. Nice.
Okay.
And lastly, to get that fantasy vibe and still have some sort of, industrial feel to it, Lindsey Sterling's album Artemis, I thought would be a great fit.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's all 3 of those.
I'm going to have to listen to the Snowpiercer soundtrack because my memory of that movie, assuming we're talking about the movie and not the TV show, was that it was pretty action-packed. So it feels, and I could be totally wrong, that the thriller nature that you objected to a couple of the tracks in Murder on the Orient Express would be exacerbated in Snowpiercer.
Yeah, there are definitely tracks that are a little intense. But, I kind of just feel like those get that sense of the engine moving forward,
Yeah.
And the threat that you're under in this fantasy, like there's orcs and there's trolls and,
And tigers, oh my. Yes. Yeah. All right. And Paul?
So I have been playing what I just searched for as fantasy tavern music.
Mm-hmm.
And pull up whatever community playlist looks interesting. So that's what I played for us the other night. That's what I played when I played with my wife today. And what I thought was really fun and interesting today was actually a few of the songs were from the Witcher 3
nice
video game, which I immediately recognized, and they fit right in.
So how did you like having a soundtrack playing while you played the game? Have you done that one before?
A couple times. Today it worked very well, although we both laughed out loud when a lute, flute, and harp rendition of Blinding Lights by The Weeknd went on.
Okay, that's great.
It was.
So when I was looking for music to think about, I was thinking of fantasy environments and which ones I really enjoyed. And I started coming up with like The Legend of Zelda, right? There's so many iconic soundtracks from that game. So, I had that down. I wrote that down as my answer. Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild soundtrack. So then we're playing and I go, hey, let's listen to this. And for whatever reason, the only version Alexa could find last night, Paul, was for piano and flute. And it was terrible. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. It kind of ruined the mood.
It totally did. So stick to Fantasy Tavern music. You can't go wrong. If you're going to listen to The Legend of Zelda, then make sure it's the official soundtrack and not someone's interpretation on piano and flute. Stay away from that. Rating. On Board Game Geek scale of 1 to 10 now, how would you rate Iron Dragon? And Paul?
For me, it is an 8.
Okay, nice. Greg?
I have it as a 7. It's just, for me, it's too long to get higher on the list without more.
Without more?
Yeah.
There's not enough there to keep you occupied for 3 to 4 hours?
I mean, there is. It's just not on a regular basis.
Okay. I also had it down as an 8. And my thoughts were that the fantasy theme that specifically gets applied to this game makes the simple pick up and deliver nature of it a lot more interesting and fun for me. So I think it's an 8.
Agreed.
Is it replayable? How soon would you want to revisit the game? And Paul's already answered this question apparently within 12 hours.
Well, my wife got jealous. It's one of her favorite games. So for me, it's absolutely replayable. And it's very easy for me to play it 10 times a year.
Okay.
Oh, that's nice.
That's amazing. And Greg, what did you have for replayability?
I think it's replayable. For me, it's not a monthly game, but again, that's the playtime. I wish it could be a little bit faster, but I don't know how to fix that reasonably.
Do you think it's a function of familiarity? Like, is it a proficiency?
I don't think so. I think it's just, I do think I'd like the variant we played by last night. I feel like that definitely, I felt like I already knew what I was going to do by the time my turn came around. So I didn't feel like I was holding up the game too much most of the time on building.
Yeah, not at all.
But but even so, it took us 3 hours for 3 of us. So
it's a very big map. Compared to other Empire builders, Iron Dragon might be the biggest.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And I also had it down as replayable. Frequency, I don't know, once every 3 or 4 months. Right now, of the 2 long games that we played last week, I liked Iron Dragon better.
Gasp.
The events weren't as scathing. But with that, Melissa now has, over $250. So she wins without even participating in the podcast.
Well, she didn't connect to one city. What are you talking about?
Gold pieces, Todd.
Oh,
Gold
come
pieces.
on. Squares. All right. For our next game, we'll be singing a classic Louis Armstrong song. Well, I mean, for your all's sake, you'll be glad we're humming it to ourselves. Thanks for being available today, guys. This was a lot of fun to discuss and playing it last night. I really liked having the proximity of our most recent play so close to our recording date.
Very much. Had a great time.
It was a blast. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Replayable. Support for our podcast comes from listeners like you. Please subscribe, hit that like button, and leave a review wherever you listen to us. Thank you for your support. Come and talk about board games with us at replayable.fm or on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook as ReplayableFM. You can also join our team at patreon.com/replayable. We welcome your feedback, which is the only way that we are going to get better. You can get in touch with us via email at feedback@replayable.fm. And if you're interested in sponsoring us, then please contact us at sponsors@replayable.fm.